Hey guys, Marsingan here, bringing you another Dragon Ball Z Dokkan battle video. And so today, as I've already talked about previously, I've had a couple of you guys asking about it, and I did do one last year as well. We are going to do a guide to go through the best hidden potential choices for the units that are going to be releasing during the anniversary. And this is going to cover the part 1 units, although I guess the free-to-play ones don't like fully awaken and easy A until later in the celebration, but obviously the actual first form, like the farmable cards, do come out in part 1. That's where you want to farm up all the copies, and obviously, you know, you might as well fill out their hidden potential at that point. So it's worthwhile to know what you should set them as. So we're going to go through the free-to-play units and then the main units from the part 1 banners. I might do a separate video for the part 2 banners as we get closer to part 2. And then I am going to do a video, probably also coming out today, just as a guide to all the easy A's that are coming out during the anniversary. So I'll probably mention just in that video some hidden potential choices for those units as well. So we're going to go ahead and jump straight in. Let me know what you guys think down below. Let me know how excited you are for the anniversary. Do hit that like button if you find the guide useful at all. And yeah, we're just going to jump straight in. So this is the free-to-play farmable unit. Now, we only got one this year outside of the LR. If you remember, last year we got the Vegeta and Bulma and the Goku and Chi-Chi. This year we just get the one unit, which is this physical Hercule. Now, funnily enough, he is better releasing now on Global because of some of the buffs that the World Tournament category obviously received during the Golden Week celebration with the Goku and Piccolo Jr. So he's an Earthbred Fighters leader. Once he's fully Easy Aid, it's up to 77%, which is the standard for a free-to-play Easy A unit. And then his super attack, obviously, as I said at the start, right, they don't Easy A until the later part of the celebration, but you obviously want to build their hidden potential based on what they are eventually going to end up becoming, right, which is why I am talking about the Easy Aid version in this video, right? So his super attack is to massively raise defense and a high chance of massively raising attack, both for one turn, and then does supreme damage to the enemy. And then his passive, he gets 200% defense, high chance of all enemies being debuffed for 20% attack and defense. He gets attack 150 when performing a super, 2 key and an additional 50% attack and defense, and seals the enemy when there's a World Tournament enemy or ally in the same turn. So I think that's where he gets this significant buff, right? Because World Tournament before the 23rd World Tournament celebration was pretty lacking, right? And then he has a high chance of launching an additional super when the enemy is attack down or defense down. He gets a crit when the enemy is sealed. And then I think he is still the only unit that has this kind of revive. He has a high chance of reviving with 50% HP when the character is KO'd, starting from the 6th turn. So his one, as far as I'm aware, is like the LR Metal Cooler, where it's only if he dies. But it doesn't have an HP restriction, so again, just like the LR Metal Cooler, you could get one shot from full health by a super on this guy, and he can potentially still revive. But yeah, I think he's the only unit that has a chance to revive. So it's definitely not something you want to bet your whole run on, right? Like, say you had a Scouter effect active, you're just going to put him in front of a super in the hopes that you get the revival, because then you're literally pinning your entire run on a coin flip. So not sure if that is... I mean, there'll be some times where it will happen naturally, and then it could be, you know, it'll save the run, which is pretty cool. But I don't think it's something that you can really ever rely on. So going by his kit, you obviously do want additionals. Now, he is a physical unit, so he gets 5 additional anyway. But because he massively raises defense, any additional supers are obviously going to allow him to get quite a lot of extra. And then he does get an additional super when the enemy is attack down or defense down. So a lot of the difficult bosses, even in phases where you can't attack lower, you can still defense lower. But against the hardest bosses, like the red zone stages and stuff, you can't really do either of those in the later phases. So he's not going to be getting that hidden potential. He's not going to be getting that additional from his passive on a regular basis against the tough enemies. So you are going to want that hidden potential additional as much as possible. Plus he has the high chance of massively raising attack for one turn. So if the first super attack of the turn doesn't trigger that, but then you get an additional, then you could potentially trigger that. So obviously do that bit of extra damage. But I mean, honestly, this Hercule is a bit of a weird unit, because it feels like he could be okay, especially with the World Tournament buffs, like for a free-to-play unit, but he's not a support unit. So it's not like if you have a strong box, like, you know, either you're not free-to-play or you've been playing for a while. Not sure he's necessarily going to have a solid place on a lot of those teams. So I would probably go for full additional, and then honestly, he gets a guaranteed crit if the enemy is sealed, which in certain situations, again, against certain bosses, not really possible. Could be good for Super Battle Road. So I think additional and dodge is probably the way to go for this guy. And then in certain situations, he is going to be able to get that guaranteed crit. But yeah, you want those additionals in order to get the extra defense, and then some dodge as like backup defense. But of course, it could be an interesting interaction, the fact that he could potentially dodge an attack that would kill him, because then you don't have to risk that coin flip of whether he gets the revive or not. So Hercule is probably full additional, and then the rest dodge. If you do want to use him, obviously crit will make him a better damage dealer, but with no dodge, you're going to be relying on him reviving, which not only is it 50%, but you can only do it once. And you can only do it from turn 6. So that is something to bear in mind as well. So then we move on to the free-to-play LR, which is the Barbary, who will stand by into Majin Vegeta. Now, this guy is interesting because him and the Majin Vegeta both kind of serve different roles. So this guy is a support unit. If you look at his passive, he gets some key and attack and defense. He gives extreme class allies 30% attack and defense. Then he has a high chance to dodge when there's a super class enemy. Then he gets 2 key and gives extreme allies a chance to crit and an additional attack and defense when performing a super when there's an extreme enemy. So again, if we think about the toughest fights in the game, which are basically all against extreme enemies, he's not going to have that built-in chance to dodge. He's going to have a little bit of extra attack and defense and a little bit of extra crit chance, but he's not going to have that dodge. And then his super attack effects, both of them greatly raise defense for 1 turn. His 12 key has a high chance to seal, which is weird. I thought they'd stop doing chance to seal. It should just be seal. And then his 18 key has a high chance to stun. So he has some good effects. Additionals obviously will be good for him because of the greatly raising of defense. He is an int unit, so he's going to have 5 dodge, but I do think dodge is probably the main way to go for this guy, because even if you do end up fighting a super class enemy, having a high chance to dodge and then a separate extra chance to dodge is obviously going to be quite useful. But the thing you have to think about, and we'll talk about this with the actual main anniversary LRs as well, is once you exchange into the Majin Vegeta, which can be activated from the 4th turn, his kit obviously becomes quite different, right? He cannot attack until you actually perform the standby finish attack. He's got some key and defense. He gets extra defense after he receives the first hit, as long as you get 12 key. He has 40% damage reduction after you take the first hit if you get to 15 key. And then he recovers 10% HP at the end of the turn if you got to 18 key. And then you just get an attack buff for when he does the actual finish attack. So just like the Barbary, I feel like dodge is the way to go for this guy, because he can't attack anyway, right? So any additionals or crits are useless when you're in this form. Aside for, I guess, the finish attack, right, for crits. Dodge will be good, although it's kind of that weird situation like the physical Super Saiyan Bardock, where you do need him to get hit once, and then you get all those extra buffs. So if you got the 15 key, he's getting a defense boost and then damage reduction, but you have to take that first hit. So there could be situations where the first attack is a normal, which he dodges, and then the next attack is a super, and then he didn't get those extra buffs. So it's kind of tricky, because for Barbary, especially if I feel like his main use is just going to be as a floating support unit, you do kind of want some dodge on him. But then Majin Vegeta, there are situations where dodge could potentially be bad. But as he is essentially just there to tank, you're going to be putting him in front of a bunch of attacks, and then he's not going to be doing any damage. So dodge is probably a good way to go. The only reason why I would consider crits, because Barbary's there for the support, he's not there to be a damage dealer, but crits are obviously going to help out when it comes to the active skill. Well, the standby attack, I should say. So his works like the Buu Duo, where you charge it up by picking up key orbs. If you get to 29, and you fire it off, you get the actual like Martian Vegeta animation. If you get to 30, you get the Boo hatching and then Boo attacks animation. Now, both of them have the same damage modifier, 15% attack per charge counter. So if you're somebody you actually want to see the Martian Vegeta animation, they do have the same modifier, but because it's based on the number of charges you've collected, obviously if you fire his one off early, it's going to do less damage than if you'd got it to 30. And remember, you can overcharge it as well. So you can use the fully charged one at 30, but you could have picked up like 40, and then you're going to get the attack 15% per charge counter for 40 charges. Whereas if you want to fire it off early to see the Martian Vegeta animation, let's say you've got like 25 charges, that's 15 less. So 15 lots of 15%, like that's a lot of damage difference, which is a shame because the Martian Vegeta animation is really cool, but if you're going for the optimal plays, you're not going to see it very often, which kind of sucks, right? So I do think full dodge is probably the way to go, and then additional just for the Barbary part of the card, more so than the Martian Vegeta. Because the Martian Vegeta, it's like a one-time use, standby, he's a tank, and then he does a big hit at the end. But the Barbary is what you're going to be in for like the majority of the fight, and he's just there to be a support unit. So dodge is the way to go for him, I think. So, now we move on to the actual main anniversary LRs. So, these guys have very, very similar kits, but they do slightly different things with their super attacks, and they both build up different abilities by attacking. So, the Boo duo infinitely stack defense. They raise defense on their 12 key, they greatly raise defense on their 18 key, and then they just raise attack for one turn, right? So, you're constantly building up defense. And then as you can see in their passive, they have a chance to crit, as well as an extra key, up to 50% with each super attack performed. So once you've done 5 supers, they then have a 50% chance to crit. Now, the interesting thing about this unit is you might look at that and think, oh, well, you know, just go full additional, maybe throw the rest in dodge, because they're going to build up to 50% crit, which is already the equivalent of having like 25 crit in the hidden potential system. However, the problem with that is once you exchange with them, so it can be activated when HP is 50% or less, or after performing 4 or more attacks, starting from the 4th turn, you exchange into the base Goku and Vegeta guarding while Goku charges the Spirit Bomb. And then this card, as you can see if you look at their kit, so they have guard, they build up damage reduction per key sphere obtained. They do not have any crit anywhere in this part of their passive. And this is what the card changes into in order to then do the Spirit Bomb, which, like the Martian Vegeta one we just mentioned, you build up with charge counters. This does have the bigger modifier on the fully charged one, so you really do want to do the fully charged one. But it means if you give this unit 0 crit, because they're going to build up to 50% crit chance in their first form, once you switch over to this to do the Spirit Bomb will never be able to crit, because they have no crit, right? So, whilst it seems, I guess, like overkill for their first form, you do want to give this unit crit, so that the Spirit Bomb will actually get crits. Because the Spirit Bomb, especially when fully charged, like does a ridiculous amount of damage. And if you're fighting, especially like a type disadvantage fight, you're going to want that crit in order to get the real big damage numbers. So, with these guys, you do want additional, because you want to get those extra stacks. But you also have to bear in mind, both the Anniversary LRs have 2 additionals built into their kit. So they have a 70% chance to do an additional super when you get 18 key, and then they get a guaranteed additional super when you get 24. So if you get 24 key, they will do an additional that is a normal anyway, and that means you have 3 potential chances to trigger your hidden potential additional, so it doesn't need to be super, super high. So for example, even with like 10 additional, that's a 20% chance it's going to check for that 3 times. Now obviously you can still get unlucky and not get it, but it means you don't have to give them as much additional as a unit that doesn't have any built in. So I think you do want to go a good mix of additional and crit, maybe a little bit more on the crit side. And then when it comes to the GT duo, I kind of feel the same way, right? Like you want the Spirit Bomb to crit, when they eventually do their standby. Their standby is a revival rather than a charge up. But you do want the Spirit Bomb to be getting crits. These guys build up damage reduction and they infinitely stack attack rather than defense. So for them, additionals is very important because they're getting their defense for the turn from additionals. Even when you build up to full 50% damage reduction, I think their start of turn defense is still only around 250 to 300k. So you do want to be getting those additionals, because even 300k defense with 50% damage reduction, if you're getting hit by an enemy that does like 1.5 million damage, you take out the 50%, that's 750,000, and then they only have 300k defense. That means they're taking 450k damage. So every time they super, they raise their defense for the turn. So you want them to get as many supers as possible. So both of these units, I would go a nice healthy mix of additional and crit, maybe leaning a little bit more towards crit. With these guys, I could see the argument for leaning a bit more towards additional, but you do still really want this Spirit Bomb to crit when it goes off, right? Now, the one thing to bear in mind as well is the 8th anniversary, this special event that comes out at the end of part 3. You fight all of the anniversary headliners in the 8 different stages, and by beating those stages and beating the missions, you get EX skill orbs that are only equipable, at least I think they're EX. I suppose it doesn't matter because you probably wouldn't want to ever take them out, but you get skill orbs that are only equipable to those units. So when you beat stage 8, the final one, you're obviously fighting the 8th year LRs, you get these skill orbs. The silver one gives 4 crit and 4 additional, and the gold one gives 5 crit and 5 additional. So they are both the same number, so it means you're getting, especially, remember of course to equip the gold one you have to get 2 dupes, but you're getting 9 extra crit, 9 extra additional. But because it's the same number, it doesn't really affect the build, right? So if you give them a mix of crit and additional, both of them are just getting a boost by an extra 9 points. That does give you a little bit of leeway if you did want to give them a little bit of dodge. Like, I'm somebody who gives all my units 3 dodge. You could consider maybe giving them 6 or 9, just because when you do get these skill orbs, their crit and additional are going to get a decent bump. But I think you probably do just want to go all in, right? I'll probably just give both of them 3 dodge, and then once they have these skill orbs, you're going to have like close to 20 in like both crit and additional, which is going to be very, very good. So definitely bear that in mind, but I would say healthy mix of additional and crit, leaning a little bit more towards crit, and obviously you can throw in 3 dodge if you are so inclined. I am a 3 dodge advocate. I know not everybody is, so that's entirely up to you whether you do that or not. So then we have the side banner units. We have the Gotenks and Piccolo and the Ice and Nova. Gotenks and Piccolo are an interesting one because they have 2 different super attacks. They have the Vice Shout at 12 key, which is an infinite defense stacker, and then the Boo Boo Volleyball attack is at 9 to 11 key, and that infinitely stacks attack. Now when we look at their passive, they get some stats on super. They have a high chance to change orbs to rainbow. And then if we look here, they launch an additional attack that has a high chance of becoming a super when key is 11 or below. So that's a reason to aim for that. But they also have a medium chance to dodge when key is 12. Now, the way additionals work, which you guys will have noticed if you ever get additional supers with LRs, is if a unit gets an additional super attack, it's always the lowest key requirement super, which is why LRs do their 12 key as an additional. So what that means is, when this unit does an additional super, it will always be this super attack, the 9 to 11 key, which is the infinite attack stack. And it triggers this second part of their passive. So what I would say with this guy, you want to give this unit as much additional as you can, because then you can get 12 key, which is giving you this medium chance to dodge. Then you get an additional, which then technically drops their key to, I think it either drops it to 11 or 9, because 9 is the minimum, because you'll actually see it on the key wheel, like their key drop. And then that will trigger this other part of their passive, which then means they can then potentially get another additional super attack. Now the risk is, it's kind of like the free-to-play LR Vegeta Blue, where you could go for the 11 key on purpose, and then you are getting this chance to additional, and then you could still get a third attack. Whereas if you go for the 12 key, you are kind of relying on the additional from the hidden potential to then proc this later part of their passive. But I do think that's a good way to go. Unfortunately with these guys, I think neither of the side banner units were really highly rated by the JP players, because aside from Rainbow Orb changing, which they only have a high chance to do, they're not a support unit. Their links are not terrible, but they're also not the best. It's a shame because this unit has really good animations as well. But I would say with these guys, you want to go basically full additional, and then I mean, dodge as a backup is probably the best. The only problem is, like I say, as they're not a support unit, all they're really going to be doing on the team is there to do some extra damage. So ideally you would want some crits, right? So they could maybe proc those and do a bit of extra. But I think the additional is going to be very helpful, because every additional super you get is the one that's infinitely stacking their attack. So I definitely think full additional is the way to go for these guys, and then either dodge or crit, depending on your preference. So I think, considering I probably won't use them that much, I think I probably will go full additional and then the rest dodge, and then maybe I'll just give them a skill orb for like 5 crit or something. So we'll see how that goes. I guess it depends how many copies we pull, right? Whether we get the gold slot open. And then for Ice and Nova, I mean, these guys, they've got an interesting kit, but they're very similar to the Tech Sin Shenron that came out last year, because they entirely revolve around picking up orbs. They raise attack and defense for 1 turn on their super. They have a great chance to stun. And then they change AGL and STR orbs to Tech. And then, depending on how many orbs you get, they get buffs, right? So they get extra defense with 3 orbs, extra attack with 4 orbs. Then they get an additional super if you get 7, but they have to be Tech. Which is okay because they make them themselves, but it's kind of annoying that the other 2 aren't restricted, but the additional super is. And then they get attacks effective against all types when the enemy is stunned. So if you stun the enemy with their first super and then they get an additional, their additional will be doing some extra damage. And they do raise attack and defense for 1 turn, so additionals is good for them. And then, yeah, again, they just kind of end up being in the same boat as the Gotenks and Piccolo. They don't really support the team. They're only on 3 teams: Shadow Dragon Saga, Joined Forces, and GT bosses. I mean, GT bosses obviously needs all the help it can get, but additionals will be good, right? Because they get all these extra stats. They raise attack and defense for 1 turn, so if you picked up 7 tech orbs, you have the potential for getting 3 supers in 1 turn. And then, honestly, I would just put the rest in dodge, because if you are going to end up using them, like say they add GT bosses missions to more events, and you end up using these guys, like, they'll be able to do some okay numbers, but they're not going to be like eating super attacks from the more difficult bosses, even on a turn where they triple super potentially. So I think a mix of additional and dodge is probably the way to go for these guys. So those are my advices, or my advice in general, I guess, for the various new units that come out during part 1 of the anniversary, and what you should do for their hidden potential. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. That's what I'll be doing with my units. Obviously, if you have a different idea in mind, let us know in the comments how you plan to build them. But yeah, I think those will probably be the most effective choices. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. So that is going to be it for the video, guys. This has been the Masked Ningen. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Check out the links down below for the Discord and the merch store, and I will see you all again soon. Have a good one.